As you are aware, the midterm elections had just recently passed, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for those of you who are aware of who she is, had recently been elected in the state of New York.
We launched this campaign because no one was clearly and authentically talking about issues like the corrupting role of money in politics, like the disturbing human rights violations being committed by ICE, by the fact that no one was giving voice to the idea and the notion that an entire generation is graduating with crippling loads of student loan debt, a ticking time bomb for our economy. No one was talking about these issues, and when no one talks about them, we have the duty to stand up for what is right.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is someone who believes in this idea of democratic socialism.
Well, we've been talking about on the show, I believe there's a fracture in the Democratic Party, and you consider yourself a Democratic Socialist.
This is something that I have addressed before, which of course you can check out in a video that I've done previously explaining why socialism cannot be democratic. The bottom line is, and what I haven't touched upon really before, is the very fact that in order to reach this utopia, this ideal of socialism being without a government, it has to go through government first to get rid of the private sector, etc, etc. But as we know in practice, it's a very different thing from that of what you have theoretically. I think the best way to describe someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is that she's someone who means well. She's someone who just doesn't understand socialism, and this is the same with a lot of people on the left. They are driven by emotion, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying that a lot of people on the left, not everybody is a bad person. Some people just really mean well, however they just don't understand the consequences of their actions. And this is something I would like to cover more on. It's to do with the good intentions and that of the consequences of your actions. And Alexandria Cortez is someone just like that. She has good intentions and she probably really means well for people. For example, the idea that free healthcare, universal healthcare would, make things more affordable for everybody, and they would greatly increase the size of this public sector, all in the name of, trying to make things more affordable for people. And you can understand, because a lot of people don't understand why the American healthcare system ended up with the problems that it did. They think that the reason for why this happened was because it was made for a profit system. They think it would happen because the American system has somewhere along the lines a private sector, and these private pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies, etc, etc. So therefore they believe that the answer and solution to the problem is through the nationalisation. But they don't understand the consequences of those actions. So take a listen to what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has to say on healthcare here.
They told me the story about how their cousin actually is, unfortunately diagnosed. She's battling cancer right now. And they're telling me, she can't continue in her work because of her diagnosis. And she has to pay $500 a month for insurance, and then another $800 for her medications every single month.
She mentions about the $500 for the insurance costs, and then the $800 for that of the medical costs. And she means well, she just doesn't understand. The bottom line is that if you were to explain to people the very reason why the medical costs got out of control, and explain that it's to do with the laws of supply and demand, it's to blame on the US government to begin with, through the American Medical Association monopoly, then they would understand. Now, I have done a video on this in the past, and I explained in depth and detail on the American Medical Association monopoly, on the overregulation of the private sector in healthcare, and most importantly the third-party payer system. So please go and check that video out, because it basically explains why the costs got out of control within the American healthcare system. And then you would understand the problem with the argument made with regards to the medical costs. The medical costs are in that state because of government's interference in the marketplace. And this is what we mean when people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez mention about this of the healthcare system and why it should be universal. They think that because they believe, oh look, here's private ownership, therefore it must be the fault of the private sector that's led to these problems, when in real fact it's more complicated than that, and cost comes down to that of the laws of supply and demand through essentially restricting supply and increasing demand.
Even though they're all the way from Missouri, this is not a message in advocating for healthcare as a right, fighting so that people don't have to go bankrupt to go to the doctor, should be an American right.
Now we could go on a long-winded argument on the moral argument with regards to this argument on healthcare or even on rights, because the bottom line is healthcare is a good and a service that you must pay for, and it's not a right. Now the whole argument for that is because no one has an entitlement to that of the money another individual has to work for. I mean, in order to pay for a universal healthcare system, you require society collectively to basically pay for it. In other words, you require other people's money to pay for it, and no one has a right to the money another individual works for.
What we're dealing with right now is the dynamics of power. Once someone has power, it is so hard to challenge it, even if you think that that other person was right.
Well, that's no different to the European Union. The unelected bureaucrats, it's very difficult to challenge and remove. And there lies the issue with regards to socialism, because you're going to have to use the state in order to reach the goal, the end goal of this stateless society anyway. You would have to use the state in order to get rid of the private sector, because there's no other way of doing so. She doesn't support this stateless, economy anyway. She supports democratic socialism, and therefore it's through the use of the state, the central planner, that becomes the controller and director of the economy. And as I've explained so many times on the economic calculation problem, knowledge problem, it leads on the path of its own. Again, you can check out the video that I linked, you can check that out. She mentions and acknowledges the very fact, once you have so much power, then it becomes so difficult to challenge that powerful government. And she's right in what she states there. She acknowledges that. What she doesn't acknowledge is the fact that through socialism, it leads to that very issue.
Well, we've been talking about on the show, I believe there's a fracture in the Democratic Party, and you consider yourself a Democratic Socialist, like Bernie Sanders, correct? Nancy Pelosi was asked about you, and she didn't exactly give you a ringing endorsement. Yeah. I mean, and you didn't exactly give her a ringing endorsement. Do you think that the future of the Democratic Party is socialism?
Well, first of all, there's a huge difference between socialism and democratic socialism. Democratic socialism, and really what that boils down to me, is the basic belief that I believe that in a moral and wealthy America, in a moral and modern America, no person should be too poor to live in this country.
Means well in what she says. She doesn't want people to be poor, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's the consequences of those actions, because money has to come from somewhere to pay for it. People want wages in the real world. This is something that's in practice. People want higher paid wages, but wages have to come from the money, and money has to come from somewhere to pay for it.
Socialist star Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez failing to outline where all the money for her so-called free government proposals is going to come from. Here now is Dan Henninger, Wall Street Journal editorial page deputy editor and a Fox News contributor. Let's just talk about what she's planning to give away from the goodness of her own heart. By the way, Milton Friedman said the easiest way to give away money if it's somebody else's money.
So this guy goes on to explain how the likes of Detroit became bankrupt because of the likes of the socialist policies, and didn't have the taxpayers' money to pay for it. And the taxpayers' money has to come from the private sector in order to finance it. He goes on to mention that a capitalist, financed the free tuition fees. I can tell you this, capitalists do not support these so-called free goodies, and it most certainly is not free in terms of the tuition fees. And the money has to come from somewhere to pay for it. So if it doesn't come from the private sector taxpayer, in other words, if the taxpayer doesn't have enough, the government has no other option but to take from other areas of the economy. So what you end up seeing is the cutbacks, etc. It could mean unemployment levels rise in order to pay for it. People get paid off. Or it could mean wages are suppressed in the name of paying for it. And again, it leads to this very big problem. And this is pretty much what you were seeing in the United States of America, which is where the demand came from for the $15 minimum wage. And you saw the inflation drive up. That was another way of paying for the so-called free services. And it all snowballs from there. It's just one crisis after the other. And then they start calling for the $15 minimum wage. And it leads to an even bigger problem as a result. And again, they have good intentions, but the consequences are dire.
There have been a lot of Trump wins this week. He got his travel ban. SCOTUS dealt a blow to the unions. We have the retirement of Justice Kennedy. What power do Democrats have right now?
Yeah. What I like to kind of think about is power in a much broader sense, instead of just who the incumbents in the party are and what they are capable of. I come from the background as an educator and as an organizer. So I believe that our power as a party is in organizing people, a mass movement of people. And when we organize people, when we win hearts and minds, then we impact what happens in those chambers. And that's, I think, where our power can really come from.
On the final point, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez basically speaks about organising people for the sake of this political party. Now, this is no different to the way things would be with regards to the economics, with how they would, organise and plan society. And it would be the same thing through the central planning of production and through the government price controls, because they would never accept high driven prices in the marketplace. They don't really understand the laws of supply and demand. So what they would essentially try to do is they would try to tackle the problems of higher costs by driving it down through price ceilings, and it would result in shortage problems and serious problems. Even with regards to driving prices up, if necessary, it would lead to the surplus waste problems. And that's all, like I've mentioned before, in the video on the Democratic Socialism that I've mentioned. You can check that out, and I did mention all of this type of stuff to explain it. So, what is your own personal opinion? I would like to obviously see your own opinion on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I found it quite funny that, she went through all of that, won the election, and she doesn't know how she's actually going to be able to afford to move to Washington from New York. I'm pretty sure that's where she would have to move to. Anyway, like the video, share the video, favourite the video, playlist it or whatever. And of course, if you've got any questions you would like to ask, comment in the comment section below. And of course, thank you for watching. Cheers.